When you have no choice, fate forces your hand in ways you never thought possible. Sarah Mitchell had been driving down the deserted Arizona highway for over 6 hours, her fingers gripping the Jeep's steering wheel with the precision of someone who had held weapons for years on battlefields. The Army veteran was trying to outrun memories that had haunted her since returning from Afghanistan, but some shadows from the past have a habit of catching up to us in the most unexpected moments. The lights of the Shell gas station shone like a beacon in the darkness of the early morning, promising the fuel and the pause she so desperately needed. What she didn't know was that this stop would change her life forever. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m. when Sarah pulled up near the pumps, immediately noticing the suspicious absence of other vehicles. Her military instincts, sharpened by 3 tours in the Middle East, sent a silent alert down her spine. The station looked far too deserted for a stop along the main highway, and the only light came from inside the convenience store, where a solitary figure moved behind the counter. Sarah turned off the engine and sat still for a few seconds, her trained eyes scanning the surrounding shadows for any sign of danger. Something felt off, but she needed fuel to keep moving. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the cold desert air slapped her face like a frosty warning, carrying the scent of asphalt and the distant echo of engines growling in the distance. Sarah walked toward the gas pump, posture upright and alert, every step measured with the precision of someone who had learned that survival depends on the smallest details. The sound of coins jingling in her pocket broke the oppressive silence of the night as she inserted her credit card into the machine. That's when the deafening roar of multiple motorcycles tore through the stillness, sending ice through her veins. Fate had just arrived, riding Harleys. 6 headlights sliced through the darkness like blades of light, illuminating Sarah's tense face as she instinctively moved behind her Jeep for cover. The bikers slowed down deliberately, their engines roaring in a menacing symphony that echoed off the gas station walls. Sarah could make out the leather colors, the patches on their vests, and the partially visible weapons under their jackets. Her military training immediately categorized each detail as a potential threat. The leader, a massive man with a graying beard and scars across his face, motioned to the others before dismounting his bike. In that moment, Sarah Mitchell realized a terrifying truth. She would have no choice in what was about to unfold. The choice was ripped from her hands the moment the first biker crossed the line between curiosity and intimidation. The gang leader walked toward the entrance of the convenience store with heavy, deliberate steps, his leather boots hitting the asphalt like hammers on an anvil, while his companions spread across the station in a formation Sarah immediately recognized as a tactical perimeter. She remained motionless by her Jeep, pretending to focus on pumping gas, while her hawk-like eyes monitored every movement through the reflection in the gas pump's glass. The station clerk, a young Hispanic man no older than 20, had clearly sensed the shift in atmosphere. His hands trembled visibly as he tried to look busy, rearranging products on the shelves. Sarah knew she was about to witness something terrible, but she didn't yet realize she was about to become the center of it. "Hey kid, you got a safe back there?" The gang leader's raspy voice cut through the air like a rusted blade, loaded with the authority of someone who had spent years intimidating innocent people. Sarah watched through the store window as the young clerk shook his head nervously, stammering in a mix of Spanish and English, trying to explain that he had no access to the money. The other bikers laughed, low and sinister, a sound that chilled the blood of anyone with a shred of humanity. One of them, a bald man with tattoos snaking up his neck, began deliberately knocking items off the shelves, creating a crashing noise that echoed through the silent night. Sarah clenched her fists, feeling the familiar burn of adrenaline begin to surge through her veins, the same feeling that had kept her alive in Kandahar during ambushes that claimed the lives of her fellow soldiers. The sound of shattering glass broke her focus as one of the criminals kicked over an entire shelf of soda bottles, sending a cascade of dark liquid and gleaming shards across the store floor. Sarah finished refueling with mechanical movements, but every fiber of her military instinct screamed at her to act before the situation escalated into deadly violence. The young clerk had crouched behind the counter, visibly terrified, while the gang leader began rummaging through the cash register drawer with the patience of a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. Two of the bikers stationed themselves at the store entrance, blocking any chance of escape, while a third examined the security cameras with professional interest. Sarah realized they weren't just opportunistic thieves. These were experienced criminals who knew exactly how to pull off a robbery without leaving a trace. When the fourth biker pulled out a chrome-plated pistol and casually aimed it at the clerk's head, Sarah felt her world tilt. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she replaced the pump nozzle, knowing she had crossed an invisible line from which there was no return. Her military training had been clear about situations like this. Protecting innocent civilians was a top priority, even if it meant risking your own life. Sarah began walking toward the store, her military boots making barely a sound on the asphalt, as she calculated angles, distances, and opportunities with the precision of a war machine. She knew the next few minutes would determine whether she left that place a hero or just another casualty. But one thing was absolutely certain. She couldn't live with herself if she walked away now. Having no choice means the universe conspires to reveal who you truly are when no one's watching. Sarah pushed open the convenience store door with the silence of a shadow, her years of training in covert operations allowing her to enter the hostile environment unnoticed by the criminals. The stench of spilled beer and shattered glass hit her nostrils, mingled with the metallic scent of fear radiating from the young clerk, still trembling behind the counter. She moved strategically behind a shelf of snacks, using it as cover while assessing the situation with eyes that had witnessed horrors on battlefields halfway across the world. The gang leader was still rifling through the cash register, seemingly satisfied with the few dollars he'd found. But Sarah knew men like him were never just after money. "Please, sir, I have a family," the clerk pleaded in broken English, his words emerging as desperate whispers as tears began to streak down his youthful face. The biker with the chrome pistol laughed cruelly, pressing the barrel against the boy's forehead with a casualness that spoke of years steeped in intimidation and violence. Sarah's breathing slowed into the controlled rhythm she used before pulling a trigger during precision missions in Afghanistan. Her muscles tensed imperceptibly, every fiber of her body bracing for a calculated explosion of violence that might save an innocent life. Time seemed to stretch, every second elongating like an elastic band, on the verge of snapping as she gauged the distance between her and each of the four criminals. The metallic click of a second weapon being cocked echoed through the store like a funeral bell, making Sarah's heart spike to the familiar rhythm of combat. The tattooed, bald biker had drawn a .38 revolver and was now aiming at the security cameras, apparently planning to destroy the evidence of their crimes. Sarah realized she had maybe 15 seconds before the situation turned irreversibly violent, and her hands instinctively moved to her waist, where her service weapon used to be. The absence of her pistol hit her like a punch to the gut. She was unarmed in a scenario that demanded lethal force, facing four armed criminals with nothing but her close combat skills. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 3 tours in the Middle East by being a coward or hesitating when innocent lives were on the line. "Hey, Jake, look who decided to crash the party," said a raspy voice behind her, freezing her blood. Sarah turned slowly, keeping her hands visible and her expression neutral, to find the 5th biker who had slipped in silently through the store's back entrance. He was smaller than the others, but his eyes radiated a malice that seemed to rot everything around him, and the way he held his .45 pistol showed a professional's ease with firearms. The gang leader lifted his head from the register and locked eyes on Sarah with a predatory curiosity, a cruel smile forming on his cracked lips. Well, 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 looks like we've got ourselves a little hero," he murmured, his voice laced with a sadistic amusement that made the air feel even heavier. In that moment, Sarah understood something chilling. Her attempted rescue had just turned into something far worse. Now, she was a hostage too. When you have no choice, the only option left is to show the world what your soul is made of. "Easy there, guys. I just came in to buy a soda," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying the rehearsed smoothness of someone who had learned to lie to survive behind enemy lines. The gang leader let out a loud laugh, a sound that echoed off the store walls like nails on a chalkboard, while his eyes scanned Sarah from head to toe with the hunger of a predator sizing up its next meal. She kept her posture relaxed but alert, every muscle ready to explode into lethal motion the second it was needed, mentally calculating her odds of neutralizing 5 armed men using only her bare hands and whatever objects were within reach. The smaller biker shoved the muzzle of his pistol into Sarah's ribs, forcing her to walk toward the counter, where the young clerk was still trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Jake, this one's got military written all over her," he observed, his voice laced with a dangerous curiosity that triggered every internal alarm Sarah had. Jake tilted his head, studying her with eyes that seemed capable of seeing straight into a person's soul, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she realized her civilian cover was blown. These weren't just roadside thugs. They were seasoned predators who could spot a soldier even out of uniform. "Let him go," Sarah said firmly, gesturing toward the clerk with a subtle nod. "He didn't do anything to you. He's just a kid trying to earn an honest living." Jake laughed again, but this time the sound carried a darker note, like he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. "A real hero," he muttered, signaling to his men with an almost imperceptible gesture, one Sarah instantly recognized as tactical military hand-speak. The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. She was now dealing with ex-military men who had chosen the wrong side of the law. The metallic clicks of multiple weapons being cocked filled the store like a deadly symphony, transforming the room into a psychological minefield where one wrong move meant instant death. Sarah kept her hands visible and her breathing steady, but her eyes began scanning the store for anything that could be used as an improvised weapon. Glass bottles, a broomstick leaning against the wall, even the heavy coins on the checkout counter. Jake approached with deliberate steps, his presence radiating a restrained violence that made the air feel thicker. And Sarah knew, with a soldier's instinct, that the next few seconds would determine whether she walked out of that store alive or became just another statistic in the silent war playing out on America's highways every night. Having no choice turns ordinary people into warriors, and warriors into legends that echo through eternity. Jake stopped less than a meter from Sarah, close enough that she could smell the cheap alcohol and motor oil seeping from his filthy clothes. His gray eyes studied her with the intensity of a scientist examining a rare specimen. "You know what I think, Princess?" he muttered, his voice low and dripping with malice, making the young clerk audibly sob. "I think you're not just some lost civilian on the road. You've got the look of someone who's killed before." Sarah kept her face neutral, but her heart pounded because he was right, and men like Jake were dangerous exactly because they could read people like open books. The bold biker began circling Sarah like a vulture, his weapon still aimed at the cameras as he muttered comments to the others. "Look at those hands, Jake. Calluses from years holding a rifle," he said, his accent unmistakably deep south. "And watch her stance, always keeping escape angles and clean lines of fire. She served overseas, I'd bet my Harley on it." The other bikers laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, betraying the fact that they too had realized Sarah wasn't just another victim. The temperature in the store seemed to drop several degrees. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of glass crunching under the criminal's heavy boots. Jake extended a grimy hand toward Sarah's face, his fingers creeping dangerously close to her cheek as he continued his psychological examination. "Afghanistan or Iraq?" he asked casually, as if discussing the weather. Sarah didn't reply, but the microscopic shift in her gaze was enough to confirm his suspicions, and Jake smiled with the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered his most valuable prey. Afghanistan, then. "How many tours, Princess? 2, 3. The gas station clerk kept trembling behind the counter, clearly not grasping the full weight of what was happening, but instinctively sensing the situation had reached a far more dangerous level. The sound of a motorcycle pulling up outside drew everyone's attention to the windows. Sarah used the brief distraction to subtly adjust her position, gaining half a step of tactical advantage. "Looks like our scout is back," Jake murmured, his smile growing darker. "Hope he's got good news about our legal situation." Sarah's stomach dropped. These men hadn't just stumbled onto the station. This was a premeditated operation. The arrival of the 6th gang member meant her chances of survival had plummeted, but it also meant she was about to learn exactly who she was dealing with. The choice was ripped from her hands the moment the 6th biker walked through the store entrance, carrying a military duffel bag Sarah instantly recognized as professional tactical gear. This man was different from the others. Taller, leaner, his face scarred like a map of old battles, and his movements held the efficient precision of someone with advanced military training. "Road's clear for at least 40 clicks in either direction," he reported to Jake, his voice laced with a Midwestern accent Sarah couldn't mistake. "And I confirmed our intel. No exterior cameras, and the alarm system's been down for 2 weeks. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. This wasn't a random robbery. It was a mission, planned with military precision. Jake nodded approvingly as the newcomer opened the duffel, revealing contents that made Sarah's pulse spike. Tactical comms, plastic explosives, and multiple weapons she instantly recognized as military grade. "Perfect, Marcus. Now we can proceed with Phase 2 uninterrupted," Jake said, turning to Sarah with an intensity that made her realize she had become central to whatever this plan was. The clerk whimpered in terror at the sight of the explosives, and Sarah knew she had to act soon, before this situation spiraled into something beyond containment. Her hands tensed slightly, her body preparing for what might be her final battle. Marcus walked directly toward her, studying her with eyes that had seen too much on distant battlefields. "She wasn't in the briefing," he said to Jake, his tone laced with professional concern that triggered every mental alarm in Sarah's brain. "Intel said the station would be empty, just the clerk. A veteran changes everything. If she gets out, she could compromise the entire op." Jake let out a humorless laugh, the kind cultivated through years of cruelty. "Then we make sure she doesn't get out," he replied, gesturing to his men with a motion Sarah immediately recognized. An execution order. The air thickened, charged with the electricity that comes right before violence explodes. The metallic clicks of weapons being readied filled the store like a funeral choir, and Sarah realized she had only seconds before this turned lethal for everyone involved. She glanced at the young clerk, who was now staring at her with tear-filled eyes and a silent plea for salvation. She felt the familiar burn of responsibility, the same one she'd carried in combat zones for years. Marcus approached with a tactical knife in hand, clearly intending to eliminate her quietly, to avoid the sound of gunfire. And Sarah knew. The next 5 seconds would determine whether she honored her oath to protect the innocent or died trying. Fate had conspired to put her in this moment, but how she faced it, that was still her choice. Having no choice reveals truths that shatter everything you thought you knew about your own life. Marcus froze just half a meter from Sarah, the tactical knife trembling ever so slightly in his grip. His eyes widened with a mix of shock and recognition that completely shifted the atmosphere in the store. "Sarah Mitchell?" he whispered, voice cracked with emotion, loud enough for all the other bikers to turn toward him with confused expressions. Sarah felt her world collapse. She stared into the eyes of the man holding the blade, and beneath the scars and the overgrown beard, she saw a face she knew intimately, Marcus Thompson, her former sergeant, and the last person she had seen alive during the ambush in Kandahar 3 years earlier. "You were dead," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible as long, repressed memories burst free like a dam breaking. Marcus lowered the knife, his hands trembling as tears began to streak his battle-worn face. "You left me to die in that ravine, Sarah. You and the rest of the unit ran when the Taliban closed in." Jake watched the reunion with growing fascination, clearly realizing he'd stumbled into something far deeper than a gas station heist. The clerk remained frozen, not fully understanding the drama unfolding before him, but instinctively sensing it was something that would change lives forever. The truth hit Sarah like a grenade to the chest as the puzzle pieces clicked together with surgical clarity. "You weren't dead. You deserted," she whispered, her voice laced with pain she had carried for years without understanding its true source. Marcus laughed bitterly, a sound that sliced through the air like broken glass. "Deserted. I was bleeding out in that ravine for 6 hours, waiting for backup that never came. When I finally crawled out, I found out my own unit had declared me KIA, just to cover the screw-up you all made." Jake stepped forward slowly, his eyes glowing with cruel understanding as he realized he had just uncovered the deepest wound in Sarah's soul. "So that's why you left the army," Jake murmured, voice dripping with sadistic satisfaction. "You carry the guilt of leaving your own man to die, and now fate brought you back together." Marcus raised the knife again, but this time his eyes burned with a thirst for vengeance, fed by 3 years of hate and survival on the fringes of society. "This operation isn't about money, Sarah. It's about justice, about making you pay for turning me into the ghost I've become." Sarah felt a growing horror rise inside her. Everything, the isolated station, the perfect timing, even the innocent clerk. It had all been orchestrated. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a trap, a meticulously planned act of revenge designed to destroy the last piece of her soul. The truth is a weapon more lethal than any explosive when detonated at the moment of greatest emotional vulnerability. Sarah felt her legs weaken as the full magnitude of Marcus's betrayal hit her. Years of therapy, sleepless nights, and corrosive guilt, all built upon a carefully constructed lie. "You did all of this, built a gang, orchestrated this encounter, put an innocent man at risk, just to punish me for something that never even happened." Her voice trembled with a mix of rage and despair so powerful that the other bikers instinctively stepped back. Marcus smiled cruelly, exposing cracked teeth that told stories of years living on the streets and surviving in criminal underworlds. Jake applauded slowly, his eyes glinting with genuine admiration for Marcus's intricate plan. 3 years of planning, Sarah. 3 years gathering intel on your civilian life, your travel patterns, your psychological weak points, Jake said in a melodic voice, as if narrating a particularly grim fairy tale. "Marcus came to me 2 years ago with an offer I couldn't refuse. Put together the perfect crew to execute the perfect revenge against the woman who left him to die on the battlefield." Dean, the gas station clerk, was still trembling, but Sarah noticed he was inching his way toward the phone behind the counter, apparently trying to call for help while the criminals remained distracted by their dramatic confrontation. Marcus circled Sarah like a predator, the tactical knife in his hand catching the fluorescent light as he continued his confession. "You know what's funny? I really did die in that ravine. The man I was, he bled out when he realized his own squad had left him to rot. What's left is this," he gestured at himself and the others, "a shadow thirsting for justice who spent years perfecting the ultimate plan to destroy your peace of mind." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting rage override the shock flooding her nervous system, because she was beginning to see that Marcus had made a fatal mistake in his thirst for vengeance. He had completely underestimated who she had become in the 3 years since Afghanistan. "You want justice, Marcus?" she asked, her voice regaining the lethal calm forged in countless combat missions. "Then I'll give you exactly what you deserve." She opened her eyes, and Marcus instinctively stepped back when he saw that fear had been replaced with something far more dangerous. The cold determination of a soldier who had just accepted a life-or-death mission. Jake sensed the shift in the air and signaled to his men, But Sarah was already moving, her 3 years of guilt and healing turning into pure fuel for an explosion of violence that would make the firefights in Afghanistan look like child's play. When you've got nothing left to lose, you discover you've always been stronger than any enemy could imagine. Sarah launched into motion like lightning splitting the night. Her right hand clamped onto Marcus's wrist, twisting with surgical precision until the unmistakable crack of breaking bone echoed through the store. The tactical knife flew from his hand as Marcus screamed in pain, but Sarah was already pivoting, using his body as a human shield against Jake, who had drawn his weapon with reflexes surprisingly quick for a man his age. The first shot boomed like thunder inside the confined space, but the bullet hit Marcus in the shoulder instead of Sarah, who had already transitioned into her next movement with the deadly grace of a dancer of death. The bald biker tried to adjust his aim, but Sarah had anticipated him. She kicked over an entire shelf of canned goods in his direction, creating a curtain of improvised projectiles that forced him to duck behind the counter. The young clerk took advantage of the chaos, throwing himself to the ground and crawling toward the back exit, his Spanish pleas mixing with the sound of gunfire and shattering glass. Sarah rolled behind the beverage freezer, using it as cover as she mentally calculated the position of each enemy and mapped her next attack sequence. Marcus was writhing on the floor, clutching his broken arm, temporarily neutralized. But the other 4 remained lethal threats that had to be taken out, one by one. Jake barked orders while reloading, his voice now edged with the fear of a predator becoming prey. "Kill that bitch, she's ruining years of planning." The remaining bikers moved in tactical formation, but Sarah saw it instantly. They'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating a veteran who'd survived far worse in the Middle East. She grabbed a heavy glass bottle and hurled it with military precision, striking the fluorescent light above the smallest biker and plunging half the store into darkness. The tactical advantage had shifted. Now she was fighting in her element. The sound of distant sirens began slicing through the night. The clerk had managed to trigger some kind of silent alarm. Marcus tried to stand, blood flowing from his wounded shoulder, but Sarah emerged from the shadows like a vengeful ghost, landing a precise punch to his jaw that sent him crashing back to the floor, unconscious. 3 years of nightmares. "Because of you," she hissed, her voice brimming with a fury that had fermented far too long. Jake realized his carefully orchestrated operation was crumbling, and he did what cornered predators do. He decided to drag everyone to hell with him. He reached into Marcus's vest, pulled out a grenade, and yanked the pin with a demented smile that promised no one would leave that store alive. Having no choice sometimes reveals that you've always had more power than you ever imagined. Especially when the final truth is more shocking than any revenge. The metallic clink of the grenade pin hitting the ground froze everyone's blood. But Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. A cold, knowing smile that made Jake hesitate for one fatal second. "You want to know the real truth about Kandahar, Jake?" Her voice cut through the tension like a blade as she slowly walked toward the man holding the grenade. "Marcus never told you the most important part of the story." The bikers stopped moving, instinctively sensing that they were about to witness a revelation that would change everything. Outside, the sirens were closing in fast. Jake kept his grip on the grenade, but his eyes betrayed reluctant curiosity as Sarah spoke with the calm of someone who had made peace with death long ago. "I didn't abandon Marcus to die, Jake. I left him behind because I discovered he was selling patrol route intel to insurgents. 3 of my soldiers died because of his betrayal." Her voice hardened with every word. Marcus, semi-conscious on the floor, tried to protest weakly, but Sarah pressed on, relentless. "That ambush wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap Marcus helped set up, except the Taliban decided they didn't need a traitorous American alive afterward." The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The truth hit Jake like a bullet to the brain. 3 years of loyalty built on a lie. Marcus managed to sit up, blood leaking from his mouth. She's lying," he muttered. But even his own crew could see the guilt written all over his ruined face. Sarah stepped closer to Jake, who still clutched the grenade with trembling hands. Ask him about the 20 grand the insurgents paid for intel on Sapphire Route. Ask him about the soldiers who died because someone knew exactly where our convoy would be. Jake turned to Marcus, and the look of disgust and betrayal on his face eclipsed any hatred he'd ever shown Sarah. Outside, red and blue police lights began flooding through the broken windows. Then Jake did something no one expected. He gripped the grenade and threw it out through the shattered window. The explosion lit up the parking lot, but no one inside was harmed. 3 years of my life wasted helping a traitor, Jake muttered, lowering his weapon as law enforcement surrounded the building. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was now sobbing silently on the floor, and felt a peace she hadn't known since Afghanistan. When the officers stormed the store, they found a surreal scene. A battle-hardened veteran standing amid wreckage, surrounded by criminals who had willingly surrendered. The gas station clerk, now returning with the police, looked at Sarah with a gratitude she knew he'd carry for the rest of his life. Sometimes, realizing you never had a choice is the very freedom you needed to finally choose who you really are.